Bernie Sanders opened up the new year with a letter to his, I would imagine, supporters. I don't know if he's sending this letter to people who don't support him. Maybe. But essentially a letter to his supporters. A bold, progressive agenda for a happier and healthier new year. I'm going to read part of this. Because part of it I like. When I make this point of saying I'm a sucker for those I'm going to the moon speeches, I fucking love that stuff. It's something I think there's something to be said for an overarching goal that people line up behind in order to make that work. And there's an attention to it. There's this kind of perpetual conscious awareness of the objectives that are trying to be accomplished, and doing so in somewhat of a group way. The bold progressive agenda, what needs to be said is this is not the agenda of the Democratic Party. This is Sanders' own agenda of what Sanders will want to accomplish. If this was the agenda of the Democratic Party, they would win every election, because this is the agenda of a sane, rational person looking at the government as something that's a benefit to all of Americans, not just a small percentage of Americans. But oh, my donors, oh God, the donors. Yeah, the donors will flee you if you try to enact something like this. I'm going to read part of it because I like it. When I do, I'm going to read this, but when I do this, I'm not separate from this. Like, what I realize is there's not a delineation. There's not like a separation. There's not a distinctiveness from the story to which I do versus me, myself. Like the observer versus the observer. That doesn't fully exist here. In some way it does, in some way it doesn't. When I read through the stuff, the things that you want to get accomplished, when I talk about stuff like Medicare for All or expansion of Social Security, that stuff doesn't just affect me, particularly with the medical issue, with my mom, whether her insurance is going to cover some of the stuff that they're going to have to do. But relatives, family members. Like, one of the policy objectives is expansion of Social Security. The other day, I had this jarring moment of awareness of something that I was completely blissfully aware of. My aunt, in an offhand conversation, was saying that she didn't necessarily like where she was living. Now, my first thought was like, why on earth is she living somewhere where she thinks is dangerous and unsafe? And then it hit me all of a sudden, oh wait, she's on Social Security and her living situation is somewhat fixed in the same way her income is somewhat fixed. And if anybody who knows who's on Social Security, you don't get a ton of cash. That's not something necessarily that you can live off, even though many people get to the point where they're actually trying to live off of it. My aunt being one of those people. An expansion of Social Security where you take that cap off, that 100,000 cap limit, and allow it to go to larger incomes at I think it's 6%. That would essentially flush Social Security with all the needed funds necessary for the next 30, 40, 50 years. Not to mention allow for an expansion of those benefits to the people who are, many people retiring with nothing in their bank account. I'm not distinct from the stories themselves. It matters to me from the standpoint of getting political change. It is not just about being reflexive to the other party. It's actually about getting shit accomplished. It's almost like they missed the point of the political space. They don't want to get big things done. They don't want to get real policy objectives. All of the policy objectives are purely in relation to what the Republican Party is. At some point, you need to break that. They need to be something else. From the standpoint of Sanders, him pulling out his policy objectives, personally, I like these policy objectives. Sanders is not perfect, so don't misunderstand me. But in the very specific of domestic policy, I like these policy objectives. Let me go through a few of these. So let's flip this. A bold, progressive agenda for a happier and healthier new year. In the new year, let us resolve to fight like we've never fought before for a government, a society, and economy that works for all of us, not just those on the top. That makes all the sense in the world, right? Why would you want 95% of the wealth went to the top 1% under Obama? That is a mind-blowing number. I repeat that number so often because the number sounds like it's made up, but it's not. Donald Trump is going to be worse. How is that an economy or a society or an economic system in general that works for the betterment of all of us when 95% of the spoils are going to the top 1%? Explain that to me. Regardless of what you do in your job, shouldn't that wealth to some degree go to you as opposed to the majority of it being funneled to the top 1%? Our system is off. It needs to be adjusted. That's putting it mildly. It goes without saying that 2019 will be a pivotal and momentous time for our country and the entire planet. As you know, there's a monumental clash now taking place between two very different political visions. It's more than two. It's more than two. Fact of the matter is, the agenda that Sanders is talking about runs him afoul not just of the Republican Party, but also of the Democratic Party. And it is the Democratic Party that is going to fight you tooth and nail. You must understand the ideology obliterates. You only have two parties in this country. And from the standpoint of having two parties in this country, if another party grows up, especially that party on the left, it would annihilate what it means to be a regular Democrat. After all, if the public gets behind a particular agenda from the standpoint of a party, what is the point of having the radical centrist? They could just be Republicans. Let's get down to this part. He gets into battling Trump is not enough. Meaning, it goes beyond this thing of opposing Trump. It goes into, what are you? What are you as a political instrument? What do you stand for? What are you trying to create upon the world? Getting out of politics just for the sake of politics, but politics for the sake of getting things accomplished. I like this. While the rich get richer, 40 million live in poverty, millions of workers are forced to work 2 or 3 jobs to pay the bills. 30 million have no health insurance, 1 in 5 cannot afford their prescription drugs, almost half of the older workers have nothing saved for retirement, young people cannot afford college or leave school deeply in debt. Affordable housing is increasingly scarce, and many seniors cut back on basic needs as they try to live on inadequate Social Security checks. All of that is perfectly true. Our job, therefore, is not only to oppose Trump, but to bring forth a progressive and popular agenda that speaks to the real needs of working people. We must tell Wall Street, the insurance companies, the drug companies, the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex, the National Rifle Association, and the powerful special interests that we will not continue to allow their greed to destroy this country and our planet. You need a movement for that. You need a movement. This goes beyond just something that's going to take place within a political space. These people are corrupt, and not just corrupt. That corruption has been allowed to be instantiated over time. To some degree, Washington works in a particular way, and the people are set in their ways. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked in that way. You're trying to change something. But I would make the point that what you're trying to change is a systemic issue. It's a systemic issue. Moving around deck chairs, you're going to end up to the same thing. It's like, why do you need a New Deal? Politics and democracy should not be complicated. Government must work for all of the people, not just the wealthy and the powerful. As a new House and Senate convene this week or next week, it is imperative that the American people stand up and demand real solutions to the major economic, social, racial, and environmental crises that we face. In the richest country in the history of the world, here are some, far from all, of the issues that we'll be facing this year. What do you think? You know, one thing that needs to be said here, part of, it's important what's not being said. Not just what's being said, meaning what are they saying, yes, but just as important is also what are they not saying, and what are they saying to crowd out the space of what's not being said. This Russian nonsense. You've had lefty ideas that took over the levels of debate. In order to kind of push those out Russia, Russiagate. The media filled with this Russiagate nonsense. This is somewhat of a distraction in order to cover up the fact that they were trying to get Trump or spy on Trump while at the same token allowing Hillary Clinton to get off. But it's also somewhat of a distraction from the larger issues that we deal with. They don't want to deal with the issues, so they come up with something else to talk about. Protecting American democracy. Repeal Citizens United. Yes. Move to public funding of elections and end voter suppression and gerrymandering. Our goal must be to establish a political system that has the highest voter turnout in the world and is governed by the democratic principle, one person, one vote. When I was abroad, they were shocked that our system worked that way. Meaning they couldn't understand why you would stop people from voting. And I was trying to explain to them that, yes, we have parties that try to prevent people from voting because for clear and obvious reasons, if you're not all that popular from the standpoint of ideas, you have to find other ways to get elected. And by the way, Democratic Party did this in the primaries too, so let's be fair. Take on billionaire class. In oligarchy and the growth of massive income and wealth inequalities by demanding that the wealthy start paying their fair share in taxes. We must rescind Trump's tax breaks for billionaires and close corporate loopholes. Increase wages, raise the minimum wage of $15 an hour, establish pay equity for women, and revitalize the trade union movement. Yeah, the trade union movement died for a reason, and maybe you need to go beyond that. Worker co-ops would be somewhat of a better idea. Your brother across the pond can light the way on this. What the Jeremy Corbyn's government, Labor, opposition at this point, wants to do with the worker co-op thing is a model that should be paid attention to and replicated to some degree. Make healthcare a right. Yes. An evolved society does this. Guarantee healthcare for everyone through a Medicare for All program. We cannot continue the dysfunctional healthcare system which costs us about twice as much per capita as any other country in the world and leaves 30 million uninsured. This goes for drug costs, which go up oftentimes not necessarily associated with anything other than this person or these people are going to need this drug, so I'm going to rape them over the coals and get all that I can for them. I mean, this is a gross system where a person's cancer medication is held hostage to the highest bidder. We can do better than that. We're paying twice as much as anywhere else in the world for healthcare, not to mention for the drug costs. Why are we allowing ourselves to be raped over the coals in this way? Yeah, we can change the system. Transform our energy system. Combat the global crisis of climate change, which is already causing massive damage to our planet. In the process, we can create millions of good-paying jobs as we transform the energy system away from fossil fuels to energy-efficient and sustainable energy. On that note, there was an article the other day that came out that said they found a way to trap sunlight and keep it for like 12 years. It was like a solar cell of sorts that they were able to use. It was like, but it was, what was it? It was like solar radiation, but they were able to convert it and keep it in a liquid form. It was a fascinating article. And if that's true, you're getting closer to this point of this being something that can replace oil and gas. Rebuild America. Pass a $1 trillion infrastructure plan. In the United States, we must not continue to have roads, bridges, water systems, railways in disrepair. Yes. Why would you want that? Why would you want that? Jobs for all. There's an enormous amount of work to be done throughout the country, from building affordable housing to schools to caring for our children and elderly. 75 years ago, FDR talked about the need to guarantee every able-bodied person in this country a good job as a fundamental right. That was true in 1944. Is it true today? It's true today. I agree. If the private industry can't find a place for people to work, the government itself has the capacity to create jobs, and there are jobs throughout the country. There's all sorts of shit that need to be done. That makes all the sense in the world. Full stop. Quality education. Make public college and universities tuition free. Lower student debt and adequately fund public education and move to a universal child care. Not so many years ago, the United States had the best education system in the world. We can much regain that status. Yes. It is a benefit to a society for people to go to school and people to be educated. That's not just good for the individual. And even if it is just good for the individual, so what? So what? But it is good for the society as a whole to be an educated society. That should be something that's prized. Not only should education be free, we should be able to pay people to go to school. That's how prized education and how valued it should be in our society. Just saying. Retirement security. Expand Social Security so that every American can retire with dignity and everyone with a disability can live with security. Too many of our elderly, disabled, and veterans are living on inadequate incomes. We must do better. And again, yes, and I am not separate and distinct from this. This video is going long. But, you know, when I was, all of this, the disability stuff, and don't necessarily like the word, but the illness happened when I was 17 years old. And at 17, you can get Social Security when you're on dialysis. But understand what that means. From the standpoint of Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security wasn't meant for people to live off. And at 17 years old, you're getting bare minimum subsistence along with Medicare and Medicaid. But that means that you're stuck in poverty. In perpetuity, you're stuck in poverty. There's no way you can get out that. If you start working, you're going to lose money. You're going to lose the Social Security, and you may even lose the Medicaid or you keep the Medicaid, but you may even lose the Medicare. I guess I'm making a point that he's right. Do you really want people to be persistently vulnerable? The people haven't done anything wrong per se. They were just born a particular way. They maybe ended up with a particular disability, or they get elderly. They get into old age. We shouldn't want people to be vulnerable. I don't quite understand why this is okay in our society. Justice for all, a woman's rights. It is a woman's, not a government, who should control her body. Yes, agreed. We must oppose all efforts to overturn Roe v. Wade, protect Planned Parenthood, and impose restrictive state abortions. Yes. Justice for all, end mass incarceration, and pass serious criminal justice reform. We must no longer spend $80 billion locking up more people than any country on the planet. Yes. Invest in education, jobs, not jails and incarceration. Fucking a yes. Comprehensive immigration reform. It is absurd and inhumane that millions of hardworking people, many of whom have lived in this country for decades, are fearful of deportation. We must provide legal status to those who are in the DACA program, a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented. Social justice. End discrimination based on race, gender, religion, place of birth, or sexual orientation. The Trump cannot be allowed to succeed in dividing us up. We must stand together as one people. Yes. Yeah. Look, I don't care about race, gender, sexuality, any of that stuff. I think from an economic standpoint, we should be united under one umbrella, seeing as all of us are to varying degrees vulnerable. Let's deal with our own vulnerabilities as a collective. New foreign policy. Let us create a foreign policy based on peace, democracy, and human rights. At a time when we spend more on military than the next 10 countries combined, we need to take a serious look at reforming the bloated and wasteful $716 billion annual Pentagon budget. That is an understatement. That is a magnificent understatement. You can cut that military budget in half and it will still be twice as much as any other nation or as our closest competitor. He is far too tepid on that one. But from the standpoint of the overall setting of an agenda, I like the Democratic Party. That is not their agenda. Just saying. But I do like the fact that he's adding contrast. One last point. When are you going to attack Sanders? Now, what I mean by this is Bernie Sanders, it seems that he's going to run for president. Or I don't see the point in all of this other stuff if he's not. And in him seeming as if he's going to run for president, at some point, he is going to have to attack the Democratic Party to create a delineation between who he is versus who they are. And this is not a subtle thing. This has to be somewhat of an overt thing. It has to be a very clear delineation between who the party is. That party is radioactive versus who Bernie Sanders is. with Bernie Sanders essentially being the independent senator from Vermont who's just so happened running in the Democratic Party as opposed to being a Democrat. I hope that's clear. Sanders, for the most part, has been inching further and further left, seeing as the party people have been trying to pretend as if they're lefties. Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, being to the name. He's been inching further. If you're going to move my way, fine. I'm going to move out further. But they're going to pretend to be lefties. And I'm making this point that not everybody follows politics closely, and people can be fooled into believing that a Cory Booker or Kamala Harris isn't anyway a lefty. Just saying, they can be fooled. So, at some point, he needs to, both barrels, go after that party. Just saying, it has to happen. There has to be a turn of a worm at some point where we're just being nice to attack Trump to, yes, I'm attacking Trump and I'm attacking you as the problem. So, that's my thought, anyway. Bernie or guillotine. Why do only corporatists get to make the nowhere else to go argument? Blue dogs won't vote Bernie. Where could they go? Trump. Come on. Well, that will be the argument, depending on how people, what takes place. Like, you get, if Bernie Sanders won instead of Hillary Clinton, the primary, the Hillary Clinton voters would have been stuck in the same boat of where you're going to go. Are you really going to vote for Trump or are you going to vote for Sanders? I suppose many of them would have voted for Sanders. In the same way that you had many Sanders supporters that ended up voting for Clinton. The nowhere else to go argument works in both ways. It just depends on who has more sway in the political space. And right now, the corporatists have more sway in the political space. I mean, after all, these guys are trying to push through PAYGO and trying to push through other policies that will cripple lefties' policy objectives. I'm sick of politics for the sake of politics. I'm talking about politics that actually get shit done. There's a difference in those things. There's a big difference in those things. There's no one else to vote for, truly. He will not run. I put money on it. Fine with me. Chris Sean. If Sanders is not going to run, he is putting a lot of energy into making it look like he's going to run. When Sanders gave the rebuttal, I think it was to the State of the Union speech, and he was standing in this kind of room that looked similar to the presidential office. That's not for no reason. I mean, they're doing that stuff to get in public mind this person in a presidential setting. It's coasting the public into a particular position or looking at the person. Like when Obama was running, at a certain point it started to look like the dresses and everything else was to make him look more presidential. I'm saying the same things happened with Sanders. The foreign policy speeches, the interaction with like Black Lives Matter and all. He's doing this stuff for reasons. I don't think it's just for shits and giggles. How do you feel about Jessica Ventura, about Bernie Sanders or Trump? I would pick Sanders over that. What's ironic is you leftists continue to support a spineless twat like Bernie. Move on and support Gabbard. At least she doesn't ignore her supporters getting screwed. Oh God, a spineless twat. Call the man a twat. British lingo. I love British lingo. Twat. I don't know Tulsi Gabbard's, I don't know all her domestic stuff. So I can't. All things being equal though, yeah, if Sanders didn't run Tulsi, I like Tulsi. You would pick Bernie over Jessica Ventura? Yes, I would. Because look, whatever you want to think of Sanders, he might have, bent the knee in 2016. Fair enough, I give you that. But I know what he stands for. I mean, at the end of the day, his policy, Bernie Sanders has given the same stump speech to anybody that will listen to him for the past 40 years. It's what he believes. He's a true believer. Now, this isn't necessarily just an overturning of capitalism. It's to some degree a reinvigoration of capitalism. You could say changing that cycle where the top 1% milks and takes all of the spoils. Um, but I, but he believes it. I'm just saying he's a true believer. There's a difference in those things. I don't know what Jesse Ventura fully believes. So, Sanders is an imperialist and progressives don't care. That's not true. I actually do care. And imperialists, that's going to be, to some degree, when you're talking about presidents, comparative. It's not necessarily an absolutist thing. There are forces that go beyond Sanders that is going to dictate, to some degree, Sanders' foreign policy. That's not necessarily, that's not giving Sanders a pass on us. I don't want you to be clear, but to some degree, it will be a comparison between him and other presidents in regard to what he does with the political space and a foreign policy standpoint. You should research Jesse Ventura. I'm aware of Jesse Ventura. I've watched Jesse Ventura for years. I don't think Sanders is a corrupt profiteer. Yeah, I don't think he is. He acts because he thinks he's bending to DC methodology as the best chance to push it. Yes, that's true. Garden, agreed. That's true. Bob Ramirez said, just keep holding up Sanders' tail away. Oh God, waving the flag. Yes, I am unashamed and perfectly okay with defending this position. The world that you live in, they said people live long enough to see people love them and then hate them. The context that you live in, the world that you live in today, this world feels solid as everything else, is built based on the campaign of Sanders. It's amazing that people throw him away so quickly, missing the point that the language that's being used, talking about college, education, when those corporate Democrats met in, I think it was March, because they were concerned that all of the dialogue from the standpoint of policy objectives have been dictated by the left. That's Sanders. He's not even a fucking Democrat. And he's essentially leading the conversation, not necessarily from the standpoint of winning in the political space, but from the standpoint of the groundswell and what people are talking about and the ideas that are being pushed. The Overton window has shifted. That shift didn't come out of the sky for rainbows and giggles. It came from that campaign, and he's pushed this going from then. Now, you can call him spineless, you can call him a sheepdog. I've called him a sheepdog myself. All of that stuff is true, but let's understand, let's get our history straight. So, yeah, I give a certain amount of credence and defends the position that if Sanders runs again, he would have my unabashed support. Just saying. If we're talking about moving the ball forward, this moves the ball forward. People are taking a piss out of me now, and it's awesome. I know you guys disagree. Where's your yellow jacket, Jamal? I don't have a yellow jacket. The Overton window may have shifted for you. I hope it has. Have you evidence? Yes. The last time around in 2008, you couldn't even get them to talk about a public option. Or at the very least, Obama was talking about the public option and then ditched it as soon as he got in office. You're not even talking about a public option. You're talking about Medicare for all. You're talking about universal health care. That is a shift in the perspective in the conversation. This education benefits or Social Security, none of this stuff was on the radar. All of the stuff is popular from the standpoint of what the public wants and what the public is okaying with. This was not true going back in 2008. There's a shift. It's changed. Just saying. Alright. I'm going to end this. This one has gone long and I'm blathering. What's happening, man? Happy New Year's to you too, Bo Leopard. Happy New Year's to you too, sir. People seem clueless to the fact that France's yellow jacket is there and Make America Great Hat. It is not. It is not. It is not. All of the people who are at the French, that yellow vest thing, they aren't like Trumpers. I mean, you might have some people who are on the right, but you have people who are all across the political spectrum at the Yellow Jacket rallies. Bernie would be revolutionary when he wins. Yeah, I think these guys are haters, but I suspect that if Sanders is in an election against Trump, or for that matter, if Trump doesn't last, that these guys, despite all of the cynicism that's being displayed here and the abuse that's thrown at the direction of the hosts, will be pulling that lever for one Miss B. Sanders. Just saying. Just saying. Alright. I'm going to end this here. Look, this is the first time in my life that somebody is running that actually wants to get something accomplished. Like, not this, triangulation nonsense, but is running because there are objectives that the population just requires. The country needs to be in a better position, whether it's towards climate, whether it's towards how we engage with each other from the standpoint of economics. And somebody comes out and says, this is what I want to accomplish. And it's not going to be perfect from the standpoint of what I want to see in the world, but it shifts the debate and shifts the conversation in a direction that makes gains, real gains, not the non-incrementalism stuff, but real decent gains in a direction that I want to go. He doesn't need to be a perfect vehicle for me, for that to be true. So people can disagree with me on this. Fair enough. Send your abuse. The sheep herder soapbox. Oh God, I know you're not talking. I know you're not talking. Still under huge attack and really not mainstream conversation. That was my point. But it is. That's what I'm getting at. It's not mainstream conversation because mainstream conversation is being ate up by the Russia stuff. But Sanders is, in every moment, he's running his mouth about the economic stuff. And he is on mainstream networks. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily even have to be mainstream networks. You're talking about the age of the internet, where a lot of these things happen on YouTube and its own channel and all that stuff. You'd get millions of views for something that you put on YouTube. You wouldn't get that many views going on television. So it's not that straightforward to say whether it's mainstream conversation or not. The support for Medicare for All being 70%, whether it's mainstream conversation or not, that support is real. The support for expansion of Social Security, for green energy policy, that support is real. That support wasn't even up for debate before. That's my point. I mean, it's like, come on. It has shifted. TYT soapbox. Oh, the fuck. Are you serious? Are you serious? Alright. I'm being joked for my position on Sanders. Fair enough. You can joke me, sir. I stand here naked and unashamed. Naked and unashamed. Alright. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. And you can always support the PayPal or Patreon. I'll see you guys in a few. I have a few more that I want to do today. Thanks all.